fascinating subject when it comes to Ukraine because very quick glance of Ukrainian politics can tell you that major political crises somehow deliberately or by accident coincide with major energy crises. You know, whatever deal is signed with Russia on the pipelines, whatever, you know, we remember the first revolution, we remember the imprisonment of Yulia Tymoshenko for the deal that she signed, and we remember, you know, deal signed by Yanukovych and the consequent revolution. So I don't want to go into conspiracies, but there is something for sure that these two things, energy and politics, go together in Ukraine. Now, ironically, everybody you can talk in Ukraine will tell you, we know exactly what we should do. We should diversify our sources of energy. We should have some kind of solution in case that there is an interruption, like the storage facility. We know that we have to have a better energy conservation, distribution, winterization, and all these kind of things. And we need a better infrastructure. So these are not the new things. I mean, we kind of know about it, and we knew about it already for 20-something years. Now, question is, what is Ukrainian government or Ukrainian companies or Ukrainian energy moguls doing about it? And we are going to discuss all these questions in very knowledgeable panel that is today with us. And you will forgive me if I will give a privilege to our female, the only female representative of the panel, should have a first one.
Thank you very much. The connection between politics and energy is everywhere, not only in Ukraine. It's in Europe, it's in the United States. Energy is a very big part of the economy, so it's impossible not to have connection to politics. But in countries that have been tied to Russia in terms of energy, like Ukraine, dependent on Russian energy entirely, like Eastern Europe, this connection becomes very dangerous because the lack of alternatives allows Moscow to play its card, its power card in all these countries. Ukraine has been absolutely critical for energy supplies, for natural gas supplies to Eastern Europe. As you know, half of the supplies that go to Europe and Turkey last year went to Ukraine. About 87 BCM of gas were transited through the Ukrainian gas network. First up, I need to say that Naftogaz of Ukraine has been a success story in Ukraine. It may have been, it still faces a lot of problems. It still has to address the deregulation, the decoupling of production and transmission. It still has to do a lot in terms of countering corruption. Nevertheless, Naftogaz of Ukraine has started making profits. It's maintaining the pipeline network pretty reliably, has made sure that the storage facilities are being filled with gas right now because it's not sure how long the supplies are going to last and the transit is going to last from Russia. And has started investing significantly in modernization of the network. But here is the biggest problem. And this is not to say that the government has not a lot of work to do to make that reform possible. But I commend Ukraine and Naftogaz of Ukraine for the work done because they are countries that are members of the European Union that have not yet deregulated, have not yet sufficiently separated the functions of the gas system and have not liberalized the gas market. Ukraine is on its way to make really significant strides very, very soon. Has made many and is going to make a lot more. Apparently, the determination of the company leadership, the support of the government has played a role. But here is the dilemma for Ukraine. The gas sector is about 1/3 of the energy mix. Ukraine will need to use gas regardless of the fact that consumption has dropped very significantly. It has dropped to 34 BCM. Ukraine used to consume about 80 BCM gas. So now it's really, because of energy efficiency measures, because of diversification and so on, that consumption has dropped significantly. But 34 BCM of gas is still a lot of gas that needs to come from somewhere. Domestic production so far secures about 22 BCM, another 12, or no, 20, less than that, 28. So another 14 have been imported from mostly entirely from European Union, but this is gas from Russia. Mr. Putin has declared that once Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream are online, they won't be reverse transit to Ukraine. And that tells you a lot about the intentions of Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream, and why they are built, and what the purpose is. The purpose is to not only bypass Ukraine, not only deny this 87 BCM of gas being transited to Ukraine, because if you put together the capacity of Nord Stream 2 is 55 BCM, the capacity of Turk Stream is 33 BCM, this is more than 87, like this is 88. All the gas that is going through Ukraine would go to these two pipelines if they're built. Turk Stream 1 and 2 are already laid under the waters of the Black Sea, and now it's a big negotiation whether one of them is going to go through the Balkans and transit gas all the way to Serbia, Hungary, and further to Austria. So this is the big dilemma. What kind of investment Naftogaz of Ukraine is supposed to make in a gas pipeline network that might not be needed tomorrow, next year? If it comes to that, then we have to start closing down pipelines. The first to go is going to be the Trans-Balkan pipeline, because the Bulgarian government is already making plans to start transiting gas on the reverse, in a reverse direction, from Turkey, from Turk Stream 2 up north, and from there west to Serbia and Hungary. So that pipeline is going to be cut off. And Naftogaz of Ukraine also representatives have told me that this probably is going to happen if there is no transit going to the Balkans. So this is the main dilemma. Two more things about Nord Stream and Turk Stream that need to be said today. Yesterday, Congress, the House, introduced legislation to sanction Nord Stream 2, which is similar, mirrors the legislation by Senator Cruz and Shaheen that was introduced in the Senate a couple of weeks ago. It's a very precise legislation. I don't know whether anybody has read the bill. There's so many sanction bills right now and resolutions and intentions of Congress. I have a list of them that we published in Polygraph. It's about 14 or 15 different resolutions in sanction bills that could have sanctioned some of them, Nord Stream 2 by now. This one is very precise. It's going to sanction only the vessels that are laying the pipelines under the waters of the Baltic Sea. There are only two companies, Allseas and the Italian Saipem right now. And there are a handful in the world that have the technology and ability to put pipelines under the sea. I wish that legislation was there before Turk Stream 2 was built by Saipem, but it's done. It's already under the waters. If Nord Stream 2, which about 1,000 kilometers is already put under the waters, is sanctioned, it won't be finished. It won't be finished, and it won't be able to transit gas to Germany. Besides, it's been delayed because of a dispute with the Danish, Denmark's government over where exactly the route of the pipeline is supposed to go, north-south of the little island in the Baltic Sea. That's one option to stop it. The other option is for the European Union to impose its regulations and really say, we need to save the capacity of these pipelines, not necessarily the ones that are under the water, but the ones that are connecting them onshore. 50% to be reserved for potential LNG import to Europe. Because Nord Stream 2 is going to leave only 10 BCM of gas in Germany. The rest is going to Central and Eastern Europe. It's going to clog the pipelines, the interconnectors that are coming from west to east. It's going to deny the European countries in Central and Eastern Europe access to alternative gas supplies, such as LNG. If this capacity is not preserved by the European Union for alternative suppliers, such as Qatar LNG, Australian LNG, American LNG, you name it. It's not about selling American LNG necessarily. It's about having an alternative. Then that clogging of the pipelines is going to lead to isolation and separation of a deficiency of quantities of gas that are going to Ukraine. So the 14 BCM that are coming now from the European Union to Ukraine, they might not be able to come at all. And Russia might not even allow for these quantities to come, for these volumes to come at all. So here is the big dilemma for Ukraine. The local gas production is growing, and it's good, but the Black Sea has limited reserves. For several years ahead, there will be enough gas. Long term, there got to be a connection that is coming from the south to Ukraine, and from west, from north to Central Eastern Europe, alternative gas supplies that could reach Ukraine that are not Russian gas supplies and won't be limited by Gazprom where they will come. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita, for a very comprehensive overview of internal and external factors. When it comes to energy, I've learned that there are people who know a lot about energy and all the details and numbers, and there are people who know the politics of energy, and very, very, very rare people who know both. And I think we are lucky to have Ambassador Morningstar with us.
I will play that. Okay.
Should be able to turn it on. Scrunch over here a little bit. Thank you, Ambassador. And I'm very, very happy to be here today. I'm sorry to the organizers that there was some confusion. It certainly been on my calendar for a long time, but something fell through the cracks and it didn't connect somehow. But I'm here and I'm glad to be here. And I've always felt very strongly about Ukraine. I have a grandmother who came over in 1903, and I made my first trip 25 years ago, and many trips since then. I think your comments, Madam Assenova, the right pronunciation, I think it was an excellent presentation as to where things are, and I can build on that. I can say I can talk about a whole lot of other issues with respect to Ukraine energy, and I would say that from the standpoint of a report card, there's been some significant progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We can get into those issues if we want. But I would like to comment on the situation with respect to Nord Stream and where things stand now. I think this is a really important year for Ukraine. Not more than an important year. I think it's a critical year. And what I think is the most important is that all of the stakeholders and parties that have an interest in Ukraine achieve a unity of purpose. And for too many times, there's been splits among the various people involved. And now, hopefully, with the new government, that there will be the ability within Ukraine to come to common positions on the various issues, whether it's unbundling with respect to naphtha gas, whether it's storage, which you mentioned in your comments, and which are critically important, but again, disagreements within the parties are keeping storage from being filled right now, and that's something that has to stop. It's important, I think, for this unity of purpose to be achieved, to demonstrate to both the European Union and the United States. Most important for Ukraine itself, but also important to demonstrate to the European Union and the United States that Ukraine is taking care of its business. And I think only by showing that will the best results come from the EU and the United States as to the appropriate steps to protect Ukraine in light of what's happening with respect to the pipelines. And if in fact Ukraine can demonstrate that unity and show that the steps are being taken that have been talked about for so long, and the progress is really being made, it will be easier to convince the parties in the EU and with respect to the US to really step up front and force the issues with Russia and Gazprom to do as much as possible to protect Ukraine. Now, question: what would that be? Sanctions, U.S. sanctions is certainly one possibility. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. From a sanctions standpoint, I guess it was positive yesterday that President Trump said, well, we're considering sanctions. How predictable President Trump will be with respect to that is a serious question. But it certainly doesn't hurt that he said that. The two most likely sanctions bills are the one you mentioned, as well as the DASCA bill, which I had I was on doing a presentation yesterday, and I had that acronym spelled out in my mind, but in my old age, I'm even forgetting what it stands for. But it's something like Defending American Security Against Kremlin Aggression. We're still the champions of acronyms in this country. From the Ukraine standpoint, there's a problem with that bill. It is not clear at all that bill captures Nord Stream under the language. Some argue, well, you can stretch an argument and say that it does, but it can also be very strongly argued that it doesn't, and it only applies to future projects anywhere in the world, actually, in which Russia is involved. The bill that you referred to on the shipping, I think, is promising from the standpoint that it's very specific sanctions, very specific targets that don't go directly after European companies other than the shipping companies. Now, that's also not totally true, because the language, there's also some very broad language in there about something to the effect that any party that facilitates in any way what the shipping companies are doing can also be subject to sanctions. So that could bring in ultimately purchasers and investors in the pipeline. Will one of these pieces of legislation pass? If I were in Las Vegas, I guess I'd be betting 50-50 on it. And there are 2 points of view, I think, on the Hill. There's one that is, and to some extent they conflict. One, the very gut reaction, certainly the feeling that I had. How can Gazprom in Russia be rewarded with a new pipeline to the detriment of Ukraine after what they've done in Crimea, in the Donbass, and the Sea of Azov? It is something that, that just doesn't make sense. And there's also, I think, a very strong feeling on the Hill, an antipathy, not towards Russia or the Russian people as such, but certainly towards Russian behavior, which we've been, such as what I just mentioned, and also all the other things with respect to the elections, with respect to Syria, Venezuela, on and on and on. On the other hand, and one of the things I think that the Ukrainian community has to talk about on the Hill and counter the argument, feeling, well, gee, we have enough problems as already with Europe, and mess up all our other sanctions with respect to Ukraine. The Europeans say, hey, look, we're making progress with the amendments to the gas directive and then the Danish issue that you talked about. Let us do our business and hold off on the sanctions, at least for now. So that is a conflicting point that would have to be dealt with. I think it's okay. I think Germany has a major obligation that they really have to step up to the plate. This is not a U.S.-Europe issue. As you mentioned, it's a Europe-Europe issue. And not only is Gazprom and Russia, and I'll say the Kremlin, dividing Europe and dividing Europe from the United States, Germany is too. And that they need to step up and to not only contribute more to developing a competitive and transparent market in Europe, but to protect Ukraine and put their money where their mouth is as far as coming up, if there is going to be a deal, that there be a binding deal that can be easily enforced with respect to transit through Ukraine. Whether that's possible, I don't know. Can you ever trust Gazprom, no matter how binding a deal might seem to be? I've often thought about it, and people may disagree. Maybe there should be contingent sanctions, that if transit through Ukraine gets below a certain amount, and assuming Ukraine is acting in good faith, that which I'm sure they would, then sanctions would go into effect. I think the end of this year is critical, obviously, with the expiration of the contract, and I think Ukraine has leverage, not just Russia having leverage at this point. People say that, Russia may not allow gas. First of all, Nord Stream 2 isn't even going to be finished, assuming it goes forward by the end of the year. Companies say there still needs to be a lot of Ukrainian transit. And if there's no agreement, Russia, says, well, maybe they'll just cut off transit. But I think Ukraine has leverage too. I'm not saying Ukraine should do this, but it's something to think about. Ukraine can play hardball too. If storage is filled during this year, and if no agreement is reached, maybe Ukraine should say there'll be no transit until there's an agreement. And what would that do? I don't know. You could argue both ways on that, and I'm just throwing that out as something to think about. I'm not sure I even agree with that, but at least it's something to think about. So there's a big zero on the sign in front of me, and I'd love to talk about some of the other issues, domestic production, the electricity market, and pushing that forward, unbundling all these things. But right now, these are the critical issues for this year, and don't forget the unity of purpose among all of those involved in Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. It seems to me that the right thing for all of us to do is to go into the compliance business, because of the sanctions. I think that business is booming now. There are so many sanctions that companies have to comply, and definitely we will need some lawyers. Luckily for us, we have a law firm representative here.
Thank you.
So let's listen to people who are going to clean our mess that politicians and experts make sometimes.
Well, thank you. I do have a presentation, so if you don't mind, I'll stand up there.
Sure. Whatever comfortable.
Thank you.
Why don't you take this with
I
you?
have to take that as well. Wonderful. Firstly, I want to say thanks to everyone for allowing me to speak, and I am grateful for being at such an excellent panel and coming third after such two excellent speakers, and looking forward to fourth. I've done this a few times, and I'm grateful for Walter to keep asking me to come. I am not a policy analyst. I am just a regular old lawyer who happens to do a lot of energy in Ukraine and has traditionally done a lot. And most of my experience has been and remains just hands-on, let's do an energy deal, whatever it happens to be, in the market. This being said, I'm taking a different view this year because I keep summarizing for everyone everything that's happening in a very legalistic, formal way, which Walter seems to love, but I think others are slightly bored. So I'd like to approach my presentation this year addressing some of the critical issues that both Ms. Assenova and Mr. Morningstar have indicated, because I agree. And in fact, even last year I mentioned that this year is going to be critical for Ukraine. And a lot of things need to happen, and I think, right, as Mr. Ambassador Morningstar is saying, priorities need to be coordinated and set up. So I'm going to run through some of these slides once I figure out how this works, and just jump around and go back to the main issue that I think everybody's talking about at this table. Firstly, I don't know what I'm doing.
Tap it.
There we go. Now, Walter asked me to address a couple of things, which I'll briefly do about what's going on in Ukraine, and that's expanding domestic production. And just a few headlines, and I'll run through them. Headline news: Ukraine accounts for 45% of the 186 active oil and gas drilling rigs active in Europe today.
Wow.
That's a big number. That means Ukraine is really trying to boost production. What that also means, under my butt, is that it hasn't boosted production. It's been doing badly in producing. Naftogaz, the head of Naftogaz, Mr. Kovalev, almost lost his head and position earlier this year because everyone was complaining that you're not producing. What are you doing? So if this is an answer to that, that's excellent. If Ukraine is issuing gas license tenders, if Ukraine is doing gas PCA tenders, production sharing agreements, that's wonderful. It needs to increase. Ukhrhazvydobывание is increasing the use of production enhancement contracts. Wonderful. It's all to enhance production. My note there is who's getting the work from Ukhrhazvydobывание? The Chinese. American contractors really are priced out of that market. Now there's a new renewable energy law. There's finally the unbundling has been reapproved of the gas network has been approved by Parliament. All of these are positive signs. So in that sense, in terms of a grade, I'll give it a good B to B plus on moving forward. However, I mean, where are we? We're still behind in production. It's not clear how competitive Ukraine's going to be once the new renewable energy law kicks into play. And in terms of the electricity market, it's a great thing, but now is Ukraine ready to move forward on it, right? There's a delay. Are we going to move forward on it as of July, or are we going to move it forward into the fall? And there's various points of view on that as well. So there's mixed messages there. You also asked about competitive transport capacity. That's what we're all talking about here. Enlarging storage capacity. I don't see how we can do that without investing a lot of money. But I think importantly for everyone to note here, storage has been commoditized. You can pledge gas and storage. That is a huge leap in the last couple of years for the gas market in Ukraine, and various gas traders have taken advantage of that, and I think it's very helpful. And in terms of increasing conservation, we're just starting to look at the issue. I mean, there's issues, Sudovit's trash problems last year, Kiev, the mayor of Detroit wanting to have a tender for a trash treatment facility in Kiev. People are starting to think about it. We have a long way to go. And I'm going to jump onto renewables. The main points that I'd like to consider, what we're all talking about here, is what is the U.S. viewpoint to Ukrainian energy? And I think Ukraine's energy security is only part of the bigger picture of European energy security, as we're talking about Russian market dominance, growing Chinese influence, and fundamentally, what does the U.S. want to do about it? And Ms. Assenova indicated this. You know, the USA, as a new competitor and counterweight to Gazprom, as to LNG. Now, you've mentioned properly both Australian LNG and Qatar LNG, but if you're following the news, the US is increasing its market share in Europe through LNG sales. And that leads to a long-term question. How does the US benefit by helping Ukraine transit Russian gas into Europe? I mean, it's great for Ukraine because we need the gas. Ukraine needs the gas now, and it needs the easy money from the transit because it is easy money. But fundamentally, from a U.S. standpoint, if and as Russian transit through Ukraine's pipelines diminishes, from a U.S. viewpoint, how bad is that really? Well, I mean, if we increase LNG capacity and we offer alternatives to Russian gas, I don't think that's such a horrible thing. I agree with you completely as to the blockage of the reverse flow, because I think that's critical to any alternative energy solutions, because you need to have the reverse flow, and to the extent the Ukrainian pipeline can be used for reverse flow, and the existing European pipelines can be conducive to that, that's ultimately, I think, where Europe's energy security lies. But I think one of the things Ukraine needs to consider, I mean, we have all these issues that, the state and all owners not in the market, et cetera, but what I want to know from this slide, Ukraine has yet to buy U.S. LNG in bulk, but Poland keeps increasing its purchases. And some news here. Yesterday, Poland, to expand LNG purchases and stop import of Russian gas by 2022. Look at, over the past years, Poland purchased 25 billion of LNG, just signed new contract to purchase an additional 2 billion. 3 American companies are supplying Polish LNG. 20-year deal. And interestingly, compared to the price of Russian gas, Poland pays approximately a quarter less for U.S. LNG. And the U.S. is the world's fastest growing exporter of liquefied natural gas, as you say, after Qatar and Australia. That's an interesting commercial statistic for Ukraine to consider. And if we look at how the current U.S. administration is looking at deal making, we'll help you if you help us. You got to buy some gas. You got to buy some LNG. Ukraine has been buying a lot of reverse flow Russian gas. And it's great for European traders. And ultimately, it's money going back to Russia. And to the extent Ukraine is asking for U.S. help in its negotiations with Gazprom, to the extent Ukraine is asking for U.S. help in the pipeline in creating a consortium to do what? Transit Russian gas again? Now, I think one of the things we should commercially consider is how to structure and allow Ukraine to start buying more U.S. LNG, or LNG from Qatar or from Australia or wherever. But that is an answer to the supply issue. It doesn't resolve the transit question for Europe, but additional alternative sources of LNG into the country, I'm not sure what else we can propose, would seriously undermine Russian dominance of the market. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen to Russia is Europe saying, we don't need your gas. And we don't care about your pipeline, we don't really need it. Thanks. I mean, that's a long-term solution. That's a real strategic question that I think starting this year, people need to address. I mean, a short-term solution in the next 5 years is buy LNG and make that possible. I think that's a worthwhile option to consider. But fundamentally, I think, in a long term, I think Ukraine, Russia, Europe need to consider where are we going with Russian gas? Okay, if it's 25% less now, Russia just today in the news proposed, in its, Miller proposed to Ukraine, we're going to drop our price 25% if you continue. It's trying to match the U.S. It's also saying we'll continue if you stop, if we have a settlement on all arbitration, Naftogaz and Gazprom. So there's a business relationship here, and I think to consider all of these things from not only geostrategic but strictly commercial views, it will be very helpful. So I'd like to add that voice to the discussion. And but just to close this out, I wanted to note in terms of renewable energy, because Ukraine is moving into this sector, and it has been moving into this sector and has been emphasizing its capacity and availability. However, Europeans dominate the market. The U.S. has not been interested all that much. It's trying, but I just want to give some sense of perspective as to where that is. Look at the production capacity in the world of renewable energy, solar and wind. Who's on top? The United States. And look where Ukraine is, below all these countries in Europe. Now, what that suggests to me, and it's more evident in the next slide, U.S. total capacity. Look how it breaks down per state. Ukraine's national capacity is behind New Jersey. So, and on wind, we're behind like Kansas, and then Kansas was like, we're way behind. So what I simply want to say is renewable energy and looking to the U.S. as a panacea of investment for Ukraine is probably not all that realistic. If you look at how much alternative renewable energy there is in the States, a lot of people don't want to go any further. But we got plenty to do here. And that's, so for Ukraine to promote renewable energy and gas production in general and make that attractive to more European players, and particularly to the United States, it would perhaps be helpful to consider what additional incentives it can offer. A level playing field is great, but looking at those statistics, you may need to offer a little bit more, because otherwise we're just not going to come. They came and they're coming for renewable energy because of, and I realize I have no time, of the wonderful green tariff, the feed-in tariff rate that's the highest in Europe. But that's not going to happen anymore. So will they still come? And that's that's something that people in the market are worried about right now in Ukraine, and something all of us need to consider. I thank you for your time, and I
Can I have my microphone? Thank you very much. Very interesting question. So I envy our last speaker because he has to sum up so many interesting propositions. I mean, all panelists agree that it's a very crucial time now for Ukraine, not only because of new president, new government, and new other, but a deal expires by the end of the year. All this Nord Stream story. It's very clear that President Trump is very proactively trying to block. Again, probably not because of Ukraine, but because of American industry of gas to sell more American gas, which is fine with me. But there are too many questions, so floor is yours to elaborate on this and other questions.
Okay. Thank everyone for inviting me, the organizers. This is actually my second summit. I was invited last year by some of you guys probably know Dr. Ariel Cohen, who's a Ukraine expert, a colleague of mine. So I was here last year as an audience member. Now I'm here as a participant. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity. yes, I don't want to sound terribly redundant. I believe Ms. Assenova took about 90% of what I was going to say. Ambassador Morningstar took the last 10%. And then Myron had some bonus stuff in there. So let me see what I can say that hasn't been said. The first is that what really hasn't been stressed is that Ukraine actually is a energy-rich country. So it has a serious energy security dilemma. What we forget is it has the second largest gas reserves in Europe. It has incredible coal reserves, although those are tied up mostly in the east, so coal production has dropped, which means that actually Ukraine, once a coal exporter, or pretty much net neutral, is now importing 60% of its coal and anthracite from Russia. We also haven't talked at all about nuclear. Nuclear power is about 50% of the mix, so I was surprised not hear anyone mention that. So for a lot of people, nuclear would seem like maybe not a no-brainer, but why not an area that we expand on? And obviously there are issues with CapEx, it's very expensive. But I think that Ukraine has the capacity, they have the infrastructure built out already. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Ukraine is actually a net electricity exporter.
It now exports electricity.
Yes, it now exports electricity. I think it's 5 billion kilowatt hours. In small, okay. So we have a country that is well endowed and is actually a net electricity exporter with some serious energy security issues. I did want to touch on the ambassador's point about Ukraine having some leverage at the end of this year. I don't think we should be expecting a gas shut-off on January 1st, 2020. The first reason being that both parties are interested in having the flow continue. I think the Russians have proposed extending the current contract into the 2020s. I believe Naftogaz, Ukrainians have pitched something like a 10-year deal for 60 BCM. So there's dialogue open. If the deal does fall through, and it may, there's the infrastructure issue. Nord Stream 2 will probably not be done by then. Neither will Turk Stream. So what are the Russians supposed to do? Not to mention, I believe it's the Opal pipeline which connects Germany with the Czech Republic. So half of, or more than half of that Russian gas that goes to Germany is getting exported from Germany to the Czech Republic. That's not going to be done until 2022 either. So there's just not enough infrastructure to actually take off Russian gas without Ukraine in the next year or two. I would anticipate Ukraine probably has until about 2022 before it has to really start worrying about losing that $3 billion of transit revenues. So they have some time, which is good. Brief word on Nord Stream 2. I find it not comical, but when Germany preaches about energy security in Nord Stream 2, I mean, right now Germany gets almost 50% of their gas demand filled by Russian gas. When Nord Stream 2 comes online, it'll be closer to 60%. They're spending $22 billion a year USD and giving it to Russia from gas. So if you're Germany, how on earth are you considering yourself energy secure if 60% of your gas is coming from Russia, arguably the most unreliable supplier on the continent? So that argument never made sense to me. I also find the fact that I think Russia is providing 1/3 of all gas to Europe, or meeting 1/3 of Europe's gas demand. Nord Stream 2 would considerably up that. I don't understand how increasing dependence on Russian gas is good for Europe or European energy security. Russia has shown time and again its willingness to weaponize its dependency, and that argument doesn't sit well with me. One other point about nuclear, which I forgot to mention, is that there is a downside, and that's that Ukraine imports 100% of its nuclear fuel. So none of it is produced domestically. 45% is Westinghouse, and 55% is Russia. So that is one thing to consider. Ukraine, if it's smart about diversifying, it will start to slow down its purchases of Russian fuel rods and move more towards the U.S. They can do the same thing for coal. I mentioned that Russia is providing 64% of Ukraine's coal imports. They should stop buying from Russia and start buying more U.S. coal. We have plenty of that. And then I guess one last thing I can touch on. Oh, I did have a question actually for Myron. For LNG to Ukraine, I know they don't allow LNG tankers through the Bosphorus. So what is and Poland obviously has a floating.
It's through Poland.
So
I mean, it won't be LNG, it'll be degasified.
Degasified, okay.
Or rather, it will be gasified.
Right. So I'm just wondering what the price difference is. You mentioned that Poland gets arguably competitive prices from U.S. as it does with Gazprom. With Ukraine, I mean, given that it would have to transit from
So
Poland.
there will be a transit price.
There would be, yeah.
There will be a transit price to consider. So it always.
No, I mean, I was curious. That's just something to consider. And then I guess the last point would be, why not, or there is a bit of a silver lining of this wedge between Russia and Ukraine, and that is that Ukraine is being pushed more towards or into the embrace of Europe. And this is a good thing as Ukraine is forced to meet European standards. Ukraine is going to be integrating into their European network of transmission system operators, ENTSOE. And ultimately, this is going to be a great thing for Ukraine, right? Their energy sector struggles from a lack of investment, aging infrastructure. The closer they get with Europe, there's going to be increased attractiveness of investment. I think one study pointed out that in this scenario of integrating with Europe and assuming that unbundling takes place and market reforms take place, Ukraine is looking at 11.5 times more investment compared to a non-reform scenario. There's also going to create a demand for 3.5 billion USD of investment into the electric grid. Also, if Ukraine gets its act together with nuclear and continues to be an exporter, we're looking at maybe an additional $1.5 to $3 billion in revenue from electricity exports, which might actually cover the spread for those lost transit fees. So I think that Ukraine should really embrace integration with the European Union. I think they need to look at their own domestic sectors, especially nuclear, try to find a way to get some fuel routes from the U.S. and decrease their dependence on Russia. And, oh yes, one more little interesting tidbit. Ukraine has 5 times the amount of natural gas as the UK, and the UK has doubled the production of Ukraine. So Ukraine's been flat at about 20 BCM since 2008, 2022. And UK is pumping out like 42 BCM. So it's a bit of a head scratcher. Ukraine has the resources. They need to open them up, cut the red tape, ease licensing, unbundle, attract investment. And I don't think the picture is that dire. If they get to 27 BCM, which is their plan that they stated they want to hit by 2020, they can reduce their current consumption, which is I think 32 or 34, by 15% just through energy efficiency alone. They can become self-sufficient by 2020, 2021 if they meet their production goals and cut domestic consumption. So not all is lost. I think the ideas are good that Ukraine has, and they understand the scenario. And like I said, they probably have some time, at least till 2022, to really get their act together before these transit fees actually are lost. And they will be lost if these pipelines get constructed. Thank you.
Just to respond to a few points, which I agree with almost all what's been said. But, you know, I think you may be right, James, that Ukraine has time to 2022, but they may not have time also. And I think the worst mistake, I won't say the worst mistake, the bad mistake that Ukraine would make would be to assume that it has time until 2022. I've spent a lot of time in Europe lately. I've spent a lot of time speaking to people from Central and Eastern European countries. And I've heard from at least 2 or 3 countries that they have been told by Russia there will be no gas going through Ukraine after January 1st. That can be a negotiating position, that can be posturing, so forth and so on. But the point being, can't assume. And the other thing, I come back to the point, and I can think of a lot of arguments why this should not happen, why Ukraine shouldn't do it. but should Ukraine allow transit after January 1st without an agreement? And is there leverage in that situation? The other side of that is that the Europeans could say, well, yeah, I guess the Russians are right, we really can't trust Ukraine. So it's a dangerous, maybe a dangerous strategy, but it's at least something to think through. Just briefly, okay, on the LNG point, I'm glad you brought up Turkey. I know Ukrainians dream about LNG tankers coming through the Bosphorus. I've have battle scars over that issues for 20 years. It will not happen, period. Poland could work, but the costs would be, I don't know. I'm a little less, and I agree, Myron, with your argument, strategic arguments as to LNG versus pipe gas and what all this means. I'm not as pessimistic for pipe gas as maybe you are, because I think, and it will be Russian, pipe gas is going to be Russian gas, whether it comes through Ukraine or otherwise, that they will compete with LNG. And yes, a lot of LNG is being sold now, but the Russians can compete with that. And the main value of LNG is that it's available to force Russia to be competitive with respect to the pricing. But it's questionable and will depend on the market as to how much LNG is actually sold. And one of the interesting issues is who's going to pay the social cost of maintaining and operating LNG terminals in Central and Eastern Europe, if in fact Russian gas is a lot cheaper, and how much of the security premium will people pay. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. A few points to make here. First of all, Nord Stream 2, the Nord Stream AG company that is building Nord Stream has ordered a study, sponsored a study by an institute in Köln, University of Köln. And the estimate of transit through Ukraine in that study is only, the highest is 30 BCM, 25, 26, 30 BCM. And it all depends on how much LNG is going to be available, of course. The more LNG is available, the price goes down. Have you seen what happened with Russian gas prices this winter, when winter was warm in Asia and Europe was flooded with LNG from all directions? The price went from 8.8 per million metric BTU to under 5. And Russian gas price dropped to under 5 as well, because the pressure from LNG prices is really the determinant of the market prices. Gazprom, Russian gas is competitive only when there is competition. I couldn't agree more with this. If we make sure there is competition, the price is going to be reasonable. Because after countries in Eastern Europe that still have bilateral contracts, how much they pay for Russian gas? A lot more than the spot price is now in Europe. The other thing is about LNG to Ukraine. This is why Poland started the TSC initiative, to connect northern shores with southern shores, to have this north-south, south-north connections, to be able to transit gas and electricity and of course trade routes and everything else. But this started with gas. Because Europe is well connected with energy terminals, but only Western Europe. We have 80% extra of energy capacity in Europe, but only in Western Europe. There's 2 terminals in Eastern Europe, in Poland and in Lithuania, and one now that's going to be built in Greece. Bulgaria already got the ticket for American LNG last week from Greece, which is positive. But you need to have this mixture, because energy also needs pipeline. How is it going to be? Croatia is planning, I don't know whether it's called Super approach to the Regress company. And this is the three things. That is the three things that several because they need to have the connections. And if we have invasion of Russian gas from the western direction, flooding Eastern Europe, this is preventing the regional market from developing. This is denying them the security infrastructure that was built so painstakingly since 2009, that was supposed to make sure that there is always connection to another country to secure gas when there is a crisis. Can you imagine all these pipelines? Pipelines are like arteries. They started from Russia, going through Ukraine, and they spread like veins, and you start bringing gas from the opposite direction. It's a lot different. The compression is not there. A lot more infrastructure needs to be built, and then we're in trouble. This is why Nord Stream 2 is such a danger. Besides, it's going to be one route, which is 70% of all Russian gas export to Europe through one route, one country. It is absolutely dangerous for energy security in the continent.
Thank you. We run out of time, unfortunately. Okay, we will accommodate one question.
We will also give grades.
Yes, I remember my homework.
Great. So, Alex, Merle, thank you for a great panel. It's been about gas a lot, so I'll stick with the theme. And I'm not an energy person, which is why I'm asking you. The danger, of course, of losing Nord Stream 2 is not losing the $3 billion in revenue. It's one of the best, if not the best, insurance blanket that Ukraine has against full-scale invasion because Russia can't destroy its own pipeline. Once the gas turns off, it can. So from Germany's perspective, they know Russia would like to do more in Ukraine, so there's sort of factoring that in, right? So the security is that if it doesn't go through Ukraine, you don't have to run the risk of Russia being pissed off and turning the gas off. But Ukraine has a card to play, and this is actually none of the people who spoke earlier are here. I'm doing a Ukrainian thing, I'm talking too much and asking this question. But Ukraine, rather than just asking for help, should make itself indispensable. And one thing that strikes me is the way Ukraine could at least try to make itself indispensable is like give Exxon the pipeline for $1. Or like if you're a Western company, like here, it's yours, we just get some transit fees, you don't have to pay us anything for it, there you go. Because I can't think of a better insurance thing. I'm picking Exxon because it's like super American. And having Exxon own the gas pipeline, which would never pay. Why can't you do that? If not, why? Why hasn't Ukraine tried? I asked this question with them when he was finance minister before he was fired. And his answer was, well, we're going to auction the transit fees or whatever, right? We're auctioning them up. And I said, well, why don't you do it? Then he said it's roughly equivalent. And I said, well, then how about America runs it and you run it and you get the transit fees, right? If they're roughly equivalent, then he sort of stumbled around with that.
Yeah, I can give you a